At my daughter's wedding, she whispered, "You're not my family anymore," and asked me not to join the family photo. I remained silent. And when she called my father-in-law, my real father, you won't believe what I did. 2 hours later, she lost control, and the consequences were impossible to stop. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. $25,000. My entire pension savings folded in this envelope, pressing against my chest pocket like a weight I couldn't ignore. The parking lot at Riverfront Manor stretched before me, a display of wealth that made my 15-year-old Ford look like a relic from another century. Mercedes, BMW, Lexus, cars that cost more than I made in 2 years at the factory. I sat behind the steering wheel, watching elegantly dressed guests glide toward the entrance. Women in designer dresses, men in tailored suits that probably cost what I spent on groceries for 6 months. My own suit, the best I owned, suddenly felt cheap and ill-fitting. The envelope crinkled as I shifted. 6 months of 60-hour weeks. 6 months of skipped meals and canceled plans. All for this moment, Georgiana's wedding day, my little girl's special day, except she wasn't little anymore. 28 years old, successful marketing career, marrying into money I could never provide. The Hayes family owned half the commercial district in Indianapolis. Norman Whitaker, her future father-in-law, could probably buy my neighborhood without checking his bank balance, but I was her father. That had to count for something. I stepped out, straightening my tie one final time. The March air carried the scent of expensive flowers and the sound of string music from the manor's gardens. Other guests moved past me with practiced ease, comfortable in this world of privilege. I followed at a distance, feeling like an imposter. The manor's entrance gleamed with crystal chandeliers visible through tall windows. Valets in crisp uniforms directed traffic. Everything sparkled with the kind of elegance that money could buy, the money I'd sacrificed to give Georgiana the wedding she deserved. "Dad?" I turned, heart lifting at the familiar voice. Georgiana stood in the doorway, radiant in her wedding dress. Silk and lace transformed her into something ethereal, a vision of bridal perfection. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to run into my arms after school. "Oh, you actually came." Her voice carried no warmth, no joy, just mild surprise, as if my presence was unexpected and slightly inconvenient. Before I could respond, she'd already turned away. "Norman? Eleanor?" Her voice brightened instantly, musical and loving. "Come meet my father." Norman Whitaker approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. Eleanor followed, elegant in navy blue, her smile perfectly practiced. "Alonzo, my friend!" Norman's handshake was firm, his smile wide and empty. "How's life treating you in retirement? Must be quite an adjustment from the factory floor." The words hit like small needles. Factory floor. Not factory work, not engineering. Factory floor. As if I'd spent 30 years pushing a broom instead of designing manufacturing systems that saved his friend's companies millions. "It's been good," I managed. "Congratulations on gaining such a wonderful daughter." "Oh, we're the lucky ones," Eleanor chimed in, her voice honey-sweet with underlying steel. "Norman, look how sweet. Our new daughter has such a hard-working father." Hard-working, another diminishing word, reducing 3 decades of skilled labor of the simple muscle and sweat. Georgiana beamed at them, her face glowing with genuine affection, the kind of warmth she'd once reserved for me. "Aren't they amazing, Dad? They've been so generous, so welcoming. They understand what family really means." The emphasis on "really" cut deeper than Norman's casual condescension. I reached for my daughter's hand, hoping for some connection, some trace of the bond we'd once shared. She stepped back smoothly, maintaining her perfect bridal pose. "We should get inside. The photographer wants to start with family pictures before the ceremony." Family pictures. The words should have filled me with anticipation. Instead, something cold settled in my stomach as I watched her link arms with Norman and Eleanor, walking between them like she belonged there, like they were her real parents. I followed behind, forgotten, invisible. The envelope in my pocket felt heavier with each step. $25,000. My sacrifice, my gift, my desperate attempt to prove I still mattered in my daughter's life. The manor's interior took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across marble floors. Floral arrangements taller than me filled every corner, their perfume almost overwhelming. Tables draped in silk, chairs tied with ribbons that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. All of it paid for with my money. My pension, my security, my future comfort, transformed into this display of luxury that impressed everyone but acknowledged no one. I was funding my own irrelevance. Magnificent, isn't it? A woman beside me sighed appreciatively. The Hayes family certainly knows how to celebrate. Your daughter is so fortunate. Fortunate. Another word that felt wrong, suggesting luck rather than love, chance rather than choice. I nodded politely, unable to form words that wouldn't reveal the growing emptiness in my chest. Georgiana laughed at something Eleanor whispered, the sound bright and musical. She'd never laughed that way with me, not in years, not since she'd started climbing the social ladder that led away from factory workers' daughters and toward respectability. The photographer was setting up near the altar, adjusting lights and testing angles. Marcus Lee, according to the contract I'd signed. $2,000 for wedding photography. Money I'd earned working double shifts, while other men my age were learning to golf. This way, please. A wedding coordinator guided me toward a side section. The bride's family seating is here. Bride's family. Singular. As if I was all that remained of Georgiana's past. A relic to be politely accommodated but not celebrated. I took the designated seat, watching Norman place his hand protectively on Georgiana's shoulder. The gesture was natural, comfortable, the way I used to guide her through crowds when she was small, before she decided that working-class love wasn't enough. That factory floor devotion couldn't compete with country club connections. The envelope crackled again as I sat down. $25,000, the price of admission to my own daughter's rejection, purchased with every overtime hour I'd worked since her engagement announcement. Marcus began organizing his equipment, chatting easily with the Hayes family. They responded with the casual confidence of people accustomed to being photographed, documented, celebrated. Georgiana glowed under their attention, basking in the kind of social approval I'd never been able to provide. We'll start with immediate family, Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the decorated space. All relatives, please gather around the bride. I stood smoothing my suit jacket, preparing to take my place beside my daughter. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the formal recognition of our bond, captured forever in wedding photographs that would hang in their home for generations. Georgiana smiled brilliantly as Norman and Eleanor flanked her sides. Edwin, her new husband, took his position with practiced ease. The Hayes family formed a perfect circle around her, their expensive clothes and confident postures creating a portrait of success. I approached the group, my heart beating faster with anticipation. My steps felt lighter as I moved toward the photography area. Finally, the moment I'd been waiting for, standing beside Georgiana, being acknowledged as her father in front of everyone who mattered. The father of the bride photos that every wedding album contained, the images that would preserve our relationship for posterity. Marcus adjusted his camera settings, his professional eye scanning the group. Perfect lighting here. This is going to be beautiful. He looked up with a welcoming smile. Everyone ready? Let's capture this family moment. The Hayes family positioned themselves naturally around Georgiana, their expensive clothes creating a cohesive picture of elegance and success. Norman's hand rested proudly on his new daughter's shoulder. Eleanor beamed with maternal satisfaction. Edwin stood confidently beside his bride, secure in his place within this privileged circle. I moved closer, anticipating my position in the arrangement. 28 years of raising Georgiana alone, of attending every school play and parent conference, of working extra shifts to afford dance lessons and college tuition, all leading to this moment of formal recognition. Actually, Georgiana's voice cut through my approach like ice, I need to clarify something. She turned toward me, her expression shifting from radiant bride to something colder, more distant. The transformation happened so quickly that for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. Sorry, Dad, but you're not my family anymore. Her words carried across the space with crystal clarity. reaching every guest within hearing distance. These are my real family members now. The world shifted beneath my feet, not metaphorically, literally. The marble floor seemed to tilt. The crystal chandeliers blurred. The expensive floral arrangements became a spinning kaleidoscope of confusion. 28 years of bedtime stories, school plays, graduations, tears and laughter and dreams shared between father and daughter, erased with one sentence, deleted, declared null and void in front of strangers wearing $1,000 suits. "Honey, maybe we shouldn't—" Edwin's voice carried a weak note of protest, his discomfort visible even through my shock. "No, Edwin." Georgiana's tone brooked no argument. "It's time for changes. Hayes is my future now. This is my real family." She gestured toward the Hayes clan with obvious pride, her face glowing with the kind of love and acceptance I remembered from her childhood. The same expression she used to wear when I surprised her with ice cream or stayed up late helping with homework. Except now it was directed at people who'd known her for 2 years, while the man who'd raised her alone stood excluded, dismissed, erased from the family portrait like an unwanted shadow. Marcus lowered his camera, clearly uncomfortable with the tension he'd inadvertently triggered. Other guests had stopped their conversations, sensing drama unfolding. Whispers began spreading through the elegantly dressed crowd like ripples across expensive silk. "I understand." The words came from somewhere deep inside me, forced out through a throat that felt crushed. "Enjoy your photos." I turned away from the group, from my daughter, from the life I'd thought we'd built together. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, heavy and uncertain. The whispers followed me, curious and sympathetic and embarrassed all at once. My assigned table waited in the corner, a single-place setting surrounded by empty chairs. The wedding coordinator had mentioned other guests would join me later, distant relatives and family friends. But for now, it was just me and the stark reality of my isolation. I sank into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to support the weight of what had just happened. The envelope in my pocket crackled again, mocking me with its substantial weight. $25,000. The price I'd paid to fund my own public humiliation. Behind me, Marcus resumed his photography session. I could hear the clicking of his camera, the gentle directions he gave to pose the Hayes family around my daughter. Their laughter carried across the space, warm and inclusive and complete, without me. "Beautiful. Now tilt slightly toward Norman, Georgiana. Perfect. Eleanor, can you move just a step closer? Excellent." Each click of the camera captured moments I would never be part of, memories that would hang in their homes and albums forever. The official record of Georgiana's new family, the people who mattered in her life now. I stared at my hands, weathered from 30 years of honest work, scarred from countless small injuries, earned providing for a daughter who had just declared me irrelevant. These hands had built her dollhouse, taught her to tie shoes, signed every check for her education and dreams. Now they trembled slightly as the full weight of her rejection settled into my bones. The photography session continued behind me, voices bright with celebration, Norman's deep laugh, Eleanor's gentle corrections, Edwin's confident responses. And underneath it all, Georgiana's voice, musical and happy in a way I hadn't heard in years. She was happy, genuinely, completely happy in a way she'd never been with me, not since she'd started her climb toward respectability. The Hayes family gave her something I never could: social acceptance, financial security, the kind of approval that came from belonging to the right class. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking slightly as I checked my bank balance. The money was still there, waiting for tomorrow's transfer. $25,000 that would disappear from my account and into the manor's coffers, paying for flowers and food and music that celebrated my replacement. "Are you all right, sir?" A young server had appeared at my table, her face kind with genuine concern. She was probably Georgiana's age, working hard to afford college or support her own family. The kind of person my daughter used to be before she decided that working-class values weren't sophisticated enough for her new aspirations. "Fine," I managed, just taking it all in. She nodded sympathetically and moved on, leaving me alone with the sound of celebration surrounding my corner of silence. The photography session was winding down. Marcus thanking the Hayes family for their patience and cooperation. I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to see Georgiana's radiant face, flushed with the satisfaction of having made her statement clear. She'd chosen her side, drawn her line, declared her allegiances. Now I would choose mine. The envelope in my pocket seemed to pulse with possibility. $25,000. My life savings, my security, my future comfort, all sitting in an envelope addressed to a daughter who had just publicly disowned me. But the money hadn't transferred yet. The check hadn't been cashed. The payment could still be reconsidered. I sat very still as the wedding celebration continued around me, my mind beginning to calculate possibilities I'd never considered before. Georgiana had made her choice about family loyalty, about what mattered and who counted and where her heart belonged. Maybe it was time I made mine. The reception began with all the pageantry money could buy. A 12-piece orchestra struck up classical melodies that echoed off the manor's crystal chandeliers. Servers in crisp uniforms circulated with silver trays bearing appetizers that probably cost more per piece than I spent on lunch. I remained at my corner table, a silent observer of my own financial investment. Every detail around me carried a price tag I'd memorized from endless invoices and contracts. Catering, $12,000. Flowers, $3,000. Band, $4,000. Photography, $2,000. Venue, $4,000. Each expense carved from my pension like pieces of my future, sacrificed for this moment of elegant celebration. Your daughter looks absolutely radiant. An elderly woman at a nearby table leaned over with genuine warmth. You must be so proud to give her such a beautiful wedding. I nodded slowly, watching Georgiana glide across the dance floor in Norman's arms. The traditional father-daughter dance, stolen and gifted to my replacement. Everyone gets what they deserve. The woman beamed, missing the edge in my voice. Oh, how wonderful. Family is everything, isn't it? Some bonds are stronger than others, I replied, my eyes never leaving the dance floor. Norman spun Georgiana gracefully, her wedding dress flowing like expensive cream around them. She laughed at something he whispered, the sound bright and musical, the way she used to laugh with me when she was small, before she learned that laughter with working-class fathers wasn't sophisticated enough for her aspirations. My phone buzzed against my leg. Bank notification, the automatic transfer reminder I'd set up weeks ago. Wedding payment scheduled for tomorrow, 9 a.m. $25,000 to Riverfront Manor. 24 hours. That's how long I had before my money became irrevocably theirs, before my sacrifice became permanent, before my humiliation was paid in full. I pulled up my banking app with steady fingers. The balance stared back at me. 27,147. My entire liquid worth, accumulated over decades of careful saving and overtime wages. Tomorrow, it would drop to 2,147. Enough for groceries and utilities for a few months, if I was careful. The dance ended to enthusiastic applause. Georgiana hugged Norman with obvious affection, then moved to dance with Edwin, while Eleanor wiped tears of joy from her eyes. A perfect family moment, documented by Marcus's camera, funded by my empty bank account. This must have cost a fortune. Another guest approached my table, his voice filled with admiration. You're incredibly generous. I looked up at him, this stranger who understood the wedding's value better than my own daughter. It's educational. He laughed, thinking I was making a joke about expensive lessons in wedding planning. If only he knew how educational this experience was becoming. How clearly it illustrated the price of love, the cost of loyalty, the exact monetary value of 28 years of devoted fatherhood. The orchestra transitioned into dinner music as servers began presenting the first course. Herb-crusted salmon, I remembered from the menu selection. $47 per plate. $47 multiplied by 120 guests. Another $5,600 of my pension, served on china that cost more than my monthly car payment. I accepted my plate mechanically, unable to taste the expensive flavors. Around me, guests exclaimed over the quality of the food, the elegance of the presentation, the obvious expense of the celebration. They understood that someone had paid dearly for this luxury. They simply assumed that someone was happy to do so. I remember when my daughter got married, an elderly woman across the table shared, nostalgically. Such a special bond between father and daughter. Nothing compares to that moment of giving her away. I cut my salmon into precise pieces, each movement controlled and deliberate. Some daughters prefer to give themselves away. She looked puzzled but didn't pursue the comment, returning to her conversation about the beauty of the ceremony. I continued eating, continued watching, continued calculating. Georgiana moved between tables like a gracious hostess, accepting congratulations and compliments with practiced ease. She'd grown into this role naturally, as if born to navigate social gatherings where champagne flowed and small talk sparkled with insider references and shared connections. When she reached tables near the Hayes family section, her laugh became more genuine, her gestures more animated. When she approached working-class relatives and factory friends I'd invited, her smile remained perfect, but grew slightly strained, her conversations shorter and less engaged. She was editing her past in real time, graduating from one social class to another with the efficient brutality of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and who she had to discard to get it. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from my bank. Reminder, large transfer scheduled for tomorrow. Call customer service to cancel or modify. Cancel or modify. 3 words that held more power than any others in my vocabulary at this moment. 3 words that could transform this entire celebration from triumph to catastrophe in the space of a phone call. I stared at the message until the screen darkened, my reflection appearing in the black glass. 62 years old, gray-haired, wearing my best suit to my own daughter's rejection ceremony. I looked like what I was, an aging factory worker who'd saved every penny to afford one moment of importance in his daughter's life. That moment had come and gone. Now I was just an expensive guest at my own execution. The dinner courses continued with clockwork precision. Soup course, $18 per bowl. Salad course, $12 per plate. Each bite represented hours of overtime work, weekends sacrificed, small comforts denied. All so Georgiana could impress people who would judge her by the elegance of her reception rather than the love of her father. "Such a lovely wedding," someone commented to their companion. "The Hayes family certainly knows how to celebrate properly." The Hayes family. As if they'd planned and paid for everything, as if their money had transformed the manor into this showcase of elegance and taste. As if I was merely a footnote in their celebration, a working-class relative tolerated for form's sake. Marcus moved through the crowd, capturing candid moments between courses. Happy guests, loving family, perfect celebration. His camera never turned toward my corner table, where the man who'd made it all possible sat alone with his untouched champagne and growing fury. Eleanor rose from her chair, moving toward the microphone with the confidence of someone accustomed to public speaking. The crowd quieted expectantly, sensing an important moment approaching. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the decorated space, "I'd like to say a few words about our beautiful new daughter. Our daughter, not Alonzo's daughter who was marrying into our family. Our daughter, as if Georgiana had been born into the Hayes clan and raised in their world of privilege and proper connections." I set down my fork, my appetite completely gone. My hand moved unconsciously to the envelope in my pocket, fingers tracing the outline of the check that would complete my financial sacrifice. But Eleanor was still speaking, and something in her tone suggested this speech would deliver another blow, another reminder of my irrelevance in Georgiana's new life. I focused on her words, preparing myself for whatever came next. The champagne in my glass had gone flat. Its bubbles disappeared like my illusions about family loyalty. Around me, guests leaned forward attentively, ready to witness another moment of Hayes family eloquence. I waited, my hand still touching the envelope, as Eleanor prepared to deliver what I sensed would be the final insult to my decades of devoted fatherhood. Eleanor's voice faded as she handed the microphone to Georgiana with maternal pride. My daughter rose gracefully, champagne flute catching the light like a crystal beacon. The entire reception fell silent, 200 guests turning their attention to the radiant bride. For one desperate moment, hope flickered in my chest. Perhaps this was my chance for redemption. The traditional daughter's speech where she thanked her father for his love, his sacrifices, his unwavering support through 28 years of devoted parenthood. "Thank you all for sharing this perfect day with us," Georgiana began, her voice confident and musical. "I want to recognize the most important people who made this possible." She paused, scanning the crowd with practiced poise. Her eyes swept past my table without acknowledgement, landing instead on Norman and Eleanor at the head table. My grip tightened on my water glass. "Norman, you became the real father I needed, the one who showed me what paternal love should truly look like." Her voice carried across the hushed room with devastating clarity. "Unlike my biological father, you succeeded where well, let's just say you set the bar much higher." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. Polite, understanding chuckles from guests who thought they were witnessing charming honesty rather than calculated cruelty. My world collapsed into that single phrase, real father. 28 years of bedtime stories reduced to a punchline. Decades of overtime shifts transformed into comedic failure. Every sacrifice, every skipped vacation, every doubled work week to afford her dreams, all dismissed with casual laughter from strangers drinking champagne purchased with my pension. Norman stood slowly, accepting the microphone with dignified grace. "My dear daughter," he said, the word daughter rolling off his tongue like a claim of ownership, "it's been my honor to guide you toward the happiness you deserve. You needed a father who truly understands your worth, your potential, your place in the world." More applause. Enthusiastic approval from people who understood the subtext perfectly. Working-class devotion couldn't compete with country club cultivation. Factory floor love was insufficient for someone with Georgiana's refined aspirations. "Welcome to our real family, darling," Eleanor added, her voice thick with emotion as she embraced my daughter. "Real family." The words echoed in my skull like hammer blows. Real father. Real family. Real life that didn't include the man who'd raised her alone after her mother died, who'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford her wedding dress, who'd emptied his savings to fund this elaborate celebration of his own replacement. I stood quietly, my movement barely noticed amid the continuing toasts and congratulations. No dramatic exit, no angry confrontation, just a man in his best suit, slipping away from a party that had transformed his love into a source of entertainment. The heavy restaurant doors muffled the celebration as I pushed through them. Behind me, applause continued for my daughter's brave honesty about upgrading to better parentage. Ahead lay the parking lot and the cool March evening air that promised clarity I couldn't find inside. My footsteps echoed across marble floors as I walked away from 28 years of fatherhood, officially terminated by public vote and recorded by professional photographers who would preserve this moment in wedding albums forever. Real father. The phrase followed me into the night, like a curse I'd paid $25,000 to hear. Cool air hit my face as the restaurant doors closed behind me, cutting off the sound of celebration like a heavy curtain. Street lights illuminated the parking lot, where luxury vehicles sat gleaming in neat rows, their polished surfaces reflecting my isolation back at me through expensive chrome. My Ford waited in the corner, humble and functional among its prestigious neighbors. I walked toward it slowly, my footsteps the only sound in the suddenly peaceful evening. No applause, no laughter, no speeches declaring my obsolescence. Just silence and the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. Reaching my car, I leaned against the driver's side door and pulled out my wallet with trembling fingers. The leather had grown soft with age, worn smooth by decades of honest work. Behind my license, tucked carefully in the photo sleeve, was a picture I'd carried for 18 years. Georgiana at 10 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, arms wrapped around my neck in fierce embrace. We'd been at the county fair, her face sticky with cotton candy, eyes bright with uncomplicated joy. She'd won a stuffed elephant at the ring toss and declared me the best daddy in the whole world, before falling asleep in my arms on the drive home. "Daddy, promise me you'll always be there for me," she'd whispered that night as I tucked her into bed. "Promise you'll never leave me like Mommy did." My throat tightened as I stared at that innocent face, trying to reconcile it with the woman who'd just publicly divorced me in front of 200 strangers. When had that trusting child transformed into someone capable of such calculated cruelty? The answer came with unwelcome clarity. gradually, methodically, over the 2 years since she'd met Edwin. Small changes I'd rationalized as maturity. Her embarrassment when I picked her up from dates in my aging Ford. Her suggestions that I dress better when meeting her new friends. Her gentle corrections of my grammar, my manners, my working-class background that no longer suited her elevated aspirations. I'd enabled every transformation, paid for etiquette classes so she could fit in better with Edwin's social circle, bought her expensive clothes for country club events where factory workers' daughters needed proper camouflage, worked extra shifts to fund the gradual erasure of everything that connected her to me. She would have set boundaries, I whispered to the photograph, thinking of my late wife, Margot. She would have stopped this before it started. But Margot had been dead for 15 years, and I'd raised Georgiana with love instead of lessons, generosity instead of guidance. Every time she'd pushed against her background, I'd smoothed the way forward rather than teaching her to value where she came from. Looking up at the stars barely visible through the city's glow, I made a decision that felt like awakening from a long dream. Margot had trusted me to protect our daughter, but protection didn't mean enabling her worst impulses. Sometimes it meant teaching consequences. I folded the photograph carefully and returned it to my wallet. The little girl who'd called me the best daddy in the whole world was gone, replaced by a woman who valued social status more than parental devotion. But I was still here, still capable of teaching final lessons about respect and gratitude. My hand moved to my shirt pocket, where the envelope waited, heavy with possibility. Under the streetlight's harsh glow, I pulled the envelope from my pocket and extracted the check with ceremonial slowness. $25,000, written in my careful handwriting, signed with the same pen I'd used to endorse report cards and permission slips for field trips to museums she'd later learned to navigate as a sophisticated adult. The paper felt substantial between my fingers, real in a way that emotions weren't. This wasn't hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was 6 months of 60-hour weeks, condensed into a single negotiable instrument that could transform celebration into catastrophe with one phone call to my bank. I studied my own signature, remembering the moment I'd signed it 3 weeks ago. I'd felt proud then, sacrificial in the way fathers should be when giving their daughters dreams. Now that signature looked like evidence of my own foolishness, documentation of how thoroughly I'd been played. $25,000, I whispered to the empty parking lot. 6 months of overtime shifts, skipped vacations, every small comfort denied. The mathematics were ruthless in their clarity. $12,000 for catering that would feed people who'd laughed at my inadequacy. $3,000 for flowers that would wilt tomorrow, while my humiliation lived forever in professional photographs. $4,000 for music that had provided soundtrack to my replacement ceremony. Each expense had seemed reasonable when I'd imagined walking my daughter down the aisle, dancing the traditional father-daughter dance, being acknowledged as the man who'd made her happiness possible. Instead, I'd funded my own funeral as her father, complete with eulogies delivered by her new family. She wants to treat me like a stranger, I asked the cold March air. Then I'll act like one. The decision crystallized with surprising peace. No anger, no revenge. Just the simple logic of cause and effect. Georgiana had chosen to publicly sever our relationship. I was merely honoring her choice by implementing its natural consequences. I tore the check in half with deliberate precision, the sound of ripping paper satisfying in its finality. One piece went into my left pocket, the other into my right, a commitment device that made reversal impossible without conscious deliberation. The liberation was immediate and overwhelming. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. No daughter to impress, no in-laws to satisfy, no social obligations to fulfill with money I couldn't afford to spend. I straightened my tie and smoothed my jacket, composing myself for the return performance. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. This was education, the final lesson in a curriculum I'd started 28 years ago when I'd promised to raise a good person. I promised to take care of her, I said quietly, remembering Margot's trust and my own naive good intentions, not to enable her cruelty. Walking back toward the restaurant entrance, I felt calmer than I had all day. Let her show everyone who she really was when the bill came due. let Norman and Eleanor demonstrate their commitment to their real daughter, when financial reality replaced social performance. I reached the heavy doors and paused with my hand on the brass handle, taking one deep breath before re-entering the world I'd just revolutionized. Behind those doors, a celebration continued in my honor, or what had been my honor before I'd reclaimed it for myself. The torn check pieces rested in separate pockets, like a secret that would soon transform into the most expensive lesson in respect that money could buy. The heavy doors swung closed behind me with muffled finality, sealing out the cool evening air and returning me to the warm bubble of celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast the same golden light, the orchestra played the same elegant melodies, and guests continued their animated conversations over champagne and expensive appetizers. But everything had changed, not the scenery, the observer. I walked through the reception with measured steps, no longer the anxious father seeking approval. The torn check pieces in my pockets felt like weapons, small paper bombs that would detonate when the moment was right. Each guest I passed, each flower arrangement I noticed, each note from the 12-piece orchestra represented money that would soon become someone else's problem. My table waited exactly as I'd left it, the untouched champagne flute still reflecting light from above. I sat down slowly, arranging my napkin with deliberate care, and began to watch the celebration with new eyes. Georgiana danced with her bridesmaids near the center of the room, her laughter bright and musical as she gestured toward the elaborate floral displays. "Look at this venue! Edwin spared no expense for our special day," she told her maid of honor, spinning in her $3,000 dress. Well, technically, Daddy paid for everything, but Edwin chose all the beautiful details. Technically, Daddy paid, as if my 6 months of overtime shifts were a minor technicality in their grand romantic story. At the head table, Edwin clinked glasses with Norman, both men wearing the satisfied expressions of successful negotiators. "Thank goodness for her father covering the wedding costs," Edwin confided, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "This would have taken us a year to save for, maybe 2. It's wonderful when simple people understand their place in supporting better things." Simple people. The phrase rolled off his tongue with casual contempt, as if factory workers existed purely to fund the dreams of their social betters. I gripped my water glass tighter, feeling the torn paper rustle in my pocket. "You must be so proud." An elderly guest at a neighboring table leaned toward me with genuine warmth. What a generous gift to give them this perfect wedding. The venue, the flowers, everything is just magnificent. "Everyone gets exactly what they deserve," I replied quietly, my voice carrying undertones she couldn't interpret. She beamed and turned back to her conversation, missing the promise hidden in my words. Around me, the celebration continued with expensive momentum. Servers circulated with silver trays bearing $40 appetizers. The photographer captured moments that would preserve this evening forever in professional albums. The orchestra played requests that cost more per song than most people spent on entertainment in a month. Every detail had been meticulously planned and flawlessly executed using my sacrifice, my pension, my future security. The irony was almost beautiful in its symmetry. I was watching my own money celebrate my own replacement. "Isn't this wonderful?" Eleanor approached my table, champagne flute in hand, her maternal satisfaction radiating like heat from an expensive fireplace. Georgiana looked so happy. It's marvelous when everything comes together so perfectly. "Perfect," I agreed, checking my watch. 7 o'clock approached with mechanical inevitability. Timing is everything. She nodded sagely and moved on, unaware that she was speaking to a man counting down to detonation. I watched her rejoin Norman at their table, both of them gesturing proudly toward their new daughter, as if they'd discovered her rather than simply purchased her loyalty with social status and empty promises. Across the room, Antonio Rossi moved between tables with professional efficiency, checking details and coordinating service with his staff. Occasionally his eyes swept toward my table, not with suspicion, but with the natural timing of a businessman who understood reception schedules. Payment time would come soon, as inevitable as gravity. I straightened my tie and smoothed my jacket, preparing for the performance of my life. 28 years of fatherhood had taught me patience, sacrifice, and unconditional love. Tonight, I would teach my daughter about consequences, boundaries, and the difference between being generous and being used. The orchestra struck up another waltz as couples took the dance floor. Georgiana danced with Edwin, their faces glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from having every dream funded by someone else's sweat. They moved together with practiced grace, a perfect couple celebrating their perfect wedding in their perfect world. In 15 minutes, perfection would meet reality. Antonio appeared at the edge of my vision, leather folder in hand, approaching with the measured pace of a man who'd done this hundreds of times before. Mr. Baker, excuse the interruption. Antonio's voice carried the professional courtesy of someone accustomed to handling financial transactions discreetly. He placed the leather folder on my table with practiced precision, its contents representing the culmination of months of planning and expense. It's time for the reception payment settlement. Here's the final itemized bill. I opened the folder slowly, examining numbers I'd memorized weeks ago. Catering, $12,000. Venue rental, $4,000. Floral arrangements, $3,000. Photography, $2,000. Music and entertainment, $4,000. Each line item represented hours of overtime work, weekends sacrificed, small comforts denied. The total sat at the bottom in bold figures. 25,000. Georgiana glided over from the dance floor, Edwin following at a respectful distance. Her face carried the confident glow of someone who'd never doubted the outcome of any financial negotiation in her life. Dad, you know our arrangement. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, as if discussing a tip for the parking valet. Time to settle up for the celebration. Everything looks perfect, doesn't it? She gestured around the decorated hall with proprietorial satisfaction, her $3,000 dress catching the light from crystal chandeliers I'd paid to illuminate. Behind her, Edwin nodded encouragingly, his relief at avoiding financial responsibility written clearly across his face. I closed the folder and looked up at my daughter, this woman who'd publicly declared me irrelevant just hours earlier. The transformation was complete, from devoted father to dispensable ATM, valued only for what I could provide. I've changed my mind, Georgiana. The words fell into sudden silence like stones into still water. Her confident smile flickered but didn't disappear, as if she hadn't quite processed the impossible thing I'd just said. Today I learned exactly who you really are, I continued, my voice steady and measured. I don't pay for strangers' parties. What do you mean? Her voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby tables. We had an agreement. Everyone is watching. You made it crystal clear that I'm not your family anymore, I replied, standing slowly to meet her eyes. So handle this like the independent adult you claim to be. Edwin stepped forward, his face pale with dawning comprehension. Sir, let's be reasonable about this. We can discuss the details privately, work out some arrangement. Nothing to discuss. I kept my voice conversational, almost friendly. She chose her real family today. Let them pay like real family does. The color drained from Georgiana's face as the implications hit her. Around us, conversation had quieted as guests sensed drama unfolding. The elegant bubble of celebration developed its first crack, a hairline fracture that would soon become a devastating break. But Daddy, she began, the childhood endearment slipping out in her panic. I'm not your daddy, remember? I picked up my water glass and took a measured sip. Norman is your real father now. I'm sure he'll be happy to demonstrate his commitment to his real daughter. Antonio shifted uncomfortably, his leather folders still open on the table, the unpaid bill exposed like a wound. This wasn't how these conversations typically went. In his experience, wedding payments were routine affairs, handled with gratitude and celebration, not family warfare conducted over itemized invoices. Georgiana's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the back of an empty chair. This isn't... You can't just... What am I supposed to tell everyone? Tell them whatever you want, I replied. You're very good at creative storytelling when it serves your purposes. Edwin looked desperately between his wife and me, clearly out of his depth in a crisis that threatened to destroy the perfect evening he'd assumed was guaranteed. There has to be some misunderstanding here. Surely we can... No misunderstanding? I interrupted. Everything is perfectly clear. You got the wedding you wanted. from the family you chose. Now comes the bill. I watched my daughter's face cycle through emotions. Disbelief, anger, panic, and finally, the first stirrings of genuine fear. For 28 years, she'd never doubted my support, never questioned my willingness to sacrifice anything for her happiness. That certainty was dying in real time, visible in her widening eyes. Georgiana turned desperately toward the head table where Norman and Eleanor sat, their faces showing the first signs of concern as they noticed the disturbance at my table. Georgiana's heels clicked rapidly against the marble floor as she hurried toward the Hayes family table, Edwin close behind her. I remained seated, watching the drama unfold with the detached interest of someone observing a carefully orchestrated experiment in human nature. Norman looked up from his conversation as his daughter-in-law approached, his patrician features showing mild concern at her obvious distress. Eleanor set down her champagne flute, her perfectly practiced smile faltering slightly. "There's been a misunderstanding with my father," Georgiana began, her voice carefully controlled despite the panic I could see building behind her eyes. "He's having second thoughts about the payment arrangement, something about feeling unappreciated." She forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "You know how emotional older people can get. I'm sure we can work this out, but in the meantime—" She paused, clearly struggling with the words she'd never imagined having to say. "Could you help us with the reception payment? Just temporarily, until we sort out this silly confusion?" Norman's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the generous patriarch transforming into a calculating businessman. "Well, son," he said, addressing Edwin while pointedly ignoring Georgiana's direct appeal, "we've already committed quite substantially to your honeymoon arrangements. The European tour, the first-class accommodations. Finances are rather tight at the moment." Eleanor nodded sympathetically, but her tone carried steel beneath the sweetness. "Of course we want to support you both, dear ones, but supporting you doesn't mean paying for everything. That's not how real families operate, is it?" The irony of her words wasn't lost on me from across the room. Real families, indeed. Edwin's face flushed with embarrassment and growing desperation. "But you said we were family now." You welcomed Georgiana with such love and generosity. Families help each other during unexpected crises. "And we are family, darling boy," Eleanor replied, patting his arm condescendingly. "But we're not automatic funding sources. Surely you can manage your own financial obligations without expecting us to rescue you from every little difficulty?" Norman straightened his expensive tie with practiced authority. "The wedding arrangements were made between you and your father-in-law. We assumed, naturally, that competent adults had handled their responsibilities appropriately." I watched Georgiana's face crumble as her new family revealed their true nature under the first sign of financial pressure. The loving, generous people who'd embraced her so warmly were showing their carefully hidden selfishness with surgical precision. "Quick, the gift table!" Georgiana whispered urgently to Edwin, abandoning diplomacy for desperate pragmatism. "We need to open the envelopes, count everything. Maybe there's enough to cover at least part of it." Edwin nodded miserably and followed her to the elegantly decorated gift table, where envelopes and wrapped packages sat in careful arrangement. Under the curious stares of nearby guests, they began the humiliating process of tearing open wedding gifts to count cash donations. "This one's from your co-workers," Edwin muttered, extracting bills from an envelope. $200. He moved to the next. "Your cousin Sarah. $150. The amounts accumulated slowly. 50 here, 100 there, occasionally a more generous 200 or 300 from closer relatives. Georgiana's hands shook as she calculated running totals, her perfect wedding composure disintegrating with each opened envelope. Guests at nearby tables watched with uncomfortable fascination as the bride and groom conducted an impromptu audit of their own wedding gifts. "How much so far?" she asked, her voice tight with suppressed panic. "Maybe 4,000, Edwin replied quietly. 5 at most. The photographer and the band, we could probably cover those, but the catering and venue—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Even with every envelope opened and every gift monetized, they were facing a shortfall that would leave significant debts unpaid and vendors unsatisfied. Antonio appeared at their makeshift counting station, his professional patience beginning to show strain. I don't mean to pressure you, but we do have other events scheduled. The kitchen staff is waiting to clean up, and we need to settle accounts this evening. Georgiana looked up at him with eyes that had learned what desperation felt like. Gift money scattered across the table told the mathematical story of her situation. Generous, but insufficient. Loving, but inadequate. Well-meaning, but ultimately useless against the reality of $25,000 in unpaid bills. She turned back toward my table, her gaze meeting mine across the elegant chaos of her perfect wedding reception. For the first time in years, possibly for the first time in her adult life, she was completely out of options, facing consequences without safety nets, experiencing what accountability actually meant. I raised my water glass in a small private toast to the woman who'd wanted so badly to prove she didn't need her father. Now she would discover exactly what that independence cost. Gift envelopes lay scattered across the table like fallen leaves, their contents revealing the cruel mathematics of wedding generosity. Georgiana's hands shook as she counted bills with increasing desperation, her perfect manicure smudged by desperate fingerprints on crumpled 20s and 50s. "This envelope from your college roommate? $60, Edwin muttered, his voice hollow with disbelief. "The one from my office colleagues? $125. He moved to the next with mechanical precision. "Great Aunt Martha, $50 and a card about finding happiness in simple things." Simple things. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched them audit their own celebration, reducing wedding wishes to currency that fell perpetually short of their desperate need. "How much total?" Georgiana asked, her voice stripped of its earlier musical confidence. "Maybe 7,800, Edwin replied, his accounting background lending unwanted precision to their humiliation. "Less than 8,000 total." $8,000. A generous sum that would have seemed miraculous to most young couples, but pathetically inadequate against the $25,000 obligation I'd withdrawn. They could cover Marcus's photography fees, pay the musicians, settle the decorating costs, but the $12,000 catering bill loomed like an unpayable mountain of debt. Marcus Lee approached their makeshift counting station with professional discretion. "Mrs. Hayes, I believe this covers my services completely." He accepted his payment with gracious efficiency. "Your photographs will be ready by Friday. Congratulations again on your beautiful wedding." Beautiful wedding. The phrase hung in the air like incense from a funeral service, as Marcus packed his equipment and departed, one vendor satisfied, others still waiting with growing impatience. "We could pay the band," Edwin suggested weakly, grasping for any solution that felt like progress. Get them settled and focused on the big problem. They managed the music payments next, watching their precious pile of gift money shrink with each transaction while the catering debt remained untouched, immovable, a financial boulder blocking their path to celebration. Antonio checked his watch with the practiced motion of someone accustomed to business schedules. "Mrs. Hayes, I need the catering payment resolved now. I have policies about outstanding balances, and my evening shift is waiting to complete cleanup." Policies. The word carried weight that social expectations couldn't match. Antonio wasn't family to be charmed or friends to be persuaded. He was a businessman with overhead costs and payroll obligations that existed regardless of family drama or wedding day emotions. Georgiana looked up from her pathetic pile of remaining bills, her face pale with the realization that even their best efforts had failed. We're still short quite a bit. Maybe we could arrange payments, a schedule, something manageable." "My contracts specify full payment upon service completion," Antonio replied, his voice firm but not unkind. $12,000 was the agreed amount. I provided the agreed service. I need the agreed payment." Desperate measures demanded desperate choices. Georgiana turned back toward my table, her pride crumbling like expensive makeup in summer heat. This wasn't the confident woman who declared me irrelevant just hours earlier. This was someone learning what real powerlessness felt like. "Dad, please!" Her voice carried across the room with humiliating volume. "I'm sorry for everything I said earlier. Can you just cover the catering? I'm begging you here." Begging. The word she'd never had to use in 28 years of my unconditional generosity. I looked up from my untouched champagne, meeting her desperate eyes with calm indifference. No, Georgiana. My voice carried clearly with outraised volume. You made your choice about family today. Learn to live with the consequences. Her face crumpled as the final door slammed shut. Edwin tried one last appeal, his financial training searching for angles that didn't exist. Sir, surely we can reach some accommodation. Family helps family during difficult times. Exactly, I replied, letting the word's implications settle. Family helps family. But you made it very clear we're not family anymore. Antonio cleared his throat, checking his watch with growing impatience. You have 10 more minutes to resolve this payment issue. After that, I contact my security service for debt collection procedures. 10 minutes. The wedding reception had become a game show with a very expensive clock, ticking down toward consequences that would make this evening unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Antonio's voice cut through the reception chatter like a dinner bell, commanding immediate attention from every guest within hearing distance. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption, but I have a business matter that requires immediate resolution. The orchestra stopped mid-song. Conversations died instantly. 200 faces turned toward the drama unfolding around the gift table, where scattered envelopes and crumpled bills told the story of financial desperation. Mrs. Hayes currently owes $12,000 for catering services provided this evening, Antonio announced with professional clarity that made privacy impossible. If this matter isn't resolved within 10 minutes, I'll be contacting security services for debt collection assistance. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, shifting in their seats as they realized they were witnessing something far beyond typical wedding drama. This was business failure happening in real time, complete with specific dollar amounts and public ultimatums. Georgiana's composure shattered like expensive crystal hitting marble floors. "Dad!" The word exploded from her throat with enough force to rattle the chandelier crystals. "You're destroying me! This is your fault! You've ruined the most important day of my life!" Her voice cracked on the final words, tears streaming down cheeks that had been professionally made up just hours earlier. The perfect bride had become a hysteric in white silk, screaming at her father while 200 witnesses watched in horrified fascination. "I've never seen anything like this at a wedding reception," someone whispered at a nearby table, their shock evident despite attempts at discretion. Edwin grabbed his wife's shoulders, his face flushed with embarrassment and panic. "Georgie, please calm down. Everyone is staring. Let's handle this quietly." "I don't care who's looking," Georgiana shrieked, her voice rising to operatic levels. "Let them all know what kind of selfish, cruel father abandons his daughter on her wedding day. Let them see exactly what Alonzo Baker is really like." She pointed at me with a trembling finger, her wedding dress rustling as she turned to address the room, like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments to a jury of uncomfortable wedding guests. "This man raised me for 28 years just to humiliate me when I needed him most. He promised to pay for everything, then changed his mind because his feelings got hurt. What kind of father does that to his own daughter?" The room remained frozen in uncomfortable silence, guests trapped between sympathy for the bride's distress and recognition that something more complex was unfolding than simple paternal cruelty. I stood slowly, straightening my tie with deliberate calm. When I spoke, my voice carried the measured authority of someone who'd made peace with difficult decisions. "Now you understand what real consequences feel like, Georgiana." I picked up my jacket from the chair back, preparing for departure. "You declared me irrelevant. I'm simply honoring your wishes." "You can't do this to me!" Her voice broke on the final word, hysteria replacing anger as the full weight of her situation crashed down. "I have nowhere else to go, no one else to ask." "Perhaps your real family will help," I replied quietly, letting the phrase hang in the air like an unresolved musical note. Norman and Eleanor remained conspicuously seated at their table, studying their champagne flutes with sudden intensity, making no move to intervene or assist in the crisis they'd helped create through their earlier refusal to provide support. Walking toward the exit, I could hear Georgiana's sobs echoing off the crystal chandeliers, her perfect wedding dissolving into chaos behind me. 200 guests sat frozen in their seats, witnessing the complete destruction of celebration they'd expected to remember fondly. The heavy restaurant doors closed behind me, muffling the sound of her continuing breakdown. I walked across the parking lot toward my Ford, each step carrying me further from 28 years of one-sided devotion and closer to a future defined by self-respect rather than endless giving. Behind me, the elegant facade of Riverfront Manor contained the ruins of perfect celebration where a woman was learning that actions have consequences and choices have costs that can't be paid with tears or accusations. My Ford started with the reliable rumble of 15 years' faithful service, a sound that had never seemed more welcoming than in this moment of complete transformation. I pulled out of the Riverfront Manor parking lot slowly, watching the elegant venue shrink in my rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely behind suburban trees and streetlights. The drive home took me through neighborhoods I'd navigated thousands of times, but tonight they looked different. Not because the scenery had changed, but because the man behind the wheel was no longer the same person who'd driven this route just hours earlier. Indianapolis at night had a peaceful quality that contrasted sharply with the chaos I'd left behind. Traffic lights cycled through their colors with mechanical precision. Late evening joggers moved along sidewalks with purposeful rhythm. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by ungrateful children or toxic relationships disguised as family obligations. 28 years I'd spent trying to buy her love with sacrifices she'd come to expect as entitlements. Every overtime shift worked to afford her dreams. Every vacation I'd skipped to fund her education. Every comfort I'd denied myself to ensure she never wanted for anything important. Tonight, I'd learned the difference between love and transaction, between gratitude and expectation, between being valued and being used. My modest house waited with lights I'd left on, a simple two-bedroom structure that had seemed almost shabby compared to the venues, where Georgiana entertained her new social circle. But pulling into my driveway, I saw it differently. Not a working-class limitation, but a sanctuary, free from people who measured worth by price tags and social status. Inside, everything remained exactly as I'd left it that afternoon. My comfortable reading chair, the television I'd bought myself for retirement, photographs of genuinely happy moments scattered on end tables and windowsills. The house felt peaceful in a way I hadn't appreciated before tonight's contrast with expensive anxiety. Margot's photograph sat on the mantelpiece where it had resided for 15 years, her smile captured during a camping trip we'd taken the summer before Georgiana started school. She looked happy in that candid shot, genuinely content with simple pleasures that hadn't required vast financial investments or social performance. I picked up the frame, studying her face with new understanding. I know you'd have handled this better, Margie. You'd have set boundaries years ago before it got this bad. But I did what I had to do tonight. She chose her path. Settling into my favorite armchair, I felt the tension of the evening drain from my shoulders, like water from a filled bathtub. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried about someone else's expectations or demands. No daughter requiring financial rescue. No in-laws demanding social performance. No obligations beyond my own comfort and well-being. Tomorrow, I would wake up with $25,000 still in my account. Money that could buy genuine comfort, rather than temporary approval from people who'd never valued the man earning it. I could travel if I wanted, upgrade my home, pursue hobbies I'd abandoned during decades of child-rearing and working to fund other people's dreams. 28 years I spent trying to buy her love, I said to Margot's photograph. Tonight I learned you can't purchase respect. Some people only understand consequences. The house was quiet, except for the familiar sounds of home, the refrigerator's gentle hum, the grandfather clock's steady ticking, the distant hum of highway traffic. These were the sounds of peace, of a life free from drama and demands and disappointment, disguised as filial relationships. I thought about Georgiana, probably still at the restaurant dealing with the aftermath of her choices. Part of me wondered how she'd resolve the catering debt, whether Norman and Eleanor would eventually step forward to help their real daughter, or if she'd learned to navigate financial consequences without a father to rescue her. But mostly I felt relief, clean, pure relief at being free from relationships built on what I could provide rather than who I was. Tonight had been expensive in ways that had nothing to do with money. The cost of finally understanding that enabling isn't love, that boundaries aren't cruelty, that self-respect sometimes requires difficult choices. I placed Margot's photograph face down on the side table, a symbolic closing of that chapter of my life when I defined myself through other people's needs and expectations. Tomorrow would begin differently, focused on a man who'd earned the right to live for himself after decades of living for others. Standing up from my chair, I looked toward the bedroom where my own bed waited, not the guest room where I'd retreated during years of walking on eggshells around my daughter's moods and demands, but my own space where I could rest without worrying about someone else's financial crises or social embarrassments. The first night of my new independent life stretched ahead with quiet promise. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.